I have a question that's kind of on a different train of thought. So it's like,
By the way, I have no idea how I'm going to put this video together, but this conversation is great. So just keep it going. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Barbecue Talk. On today's episode, we talk to another subscriber. One thing that I love seeing in my videos is the small conversations and the community building that happens within the comment section. And if you guys are one of those people who kind of interact regularly, I'm sure one person that you have seen or seen comments of is Ant. And he has his own YouTube channel called Ant's Barbecue Cookout. So just like a lot of barbecue YouTubers out there, you know, he got in contact with me. We had a lot of exchanges talking about different tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff. And I figured that he would be a great guy to have on here because I'm sure he has a lot of questions that are similar to yours. So this episode in particular is a little bit different because I talked through a little bit more about, you know, cooking tips while we also talk about, you know, my start from cooking in the backyard to restaurant to YouTube and all things like that. So I thought it was a really cool conversation to have where it wasn't just strictly on how do I make the best brisket possible. So hopefully you enjoy this conversation. I had a lot of fun talking to Anthony about just barbecue and other things just in general. So hopefully it might be something that you guys and I do sometime in the near future as well. With all that being said, let's get into the video. So we're here with Anthony. We're going to be starting another barbecue talk with another subscriber. So he shared with me a couple questions, and then we're just going to get started.
So I kind of wanted to start with a little bit with what you were saying, I guess before we were recording, about like your thought process on trying to marry the, you know, your experience with barbecue, but also your culture with, like, you know, Korean style barbecue.
I get a lot of suggestions from people, whether it's like on YouTube or on Instagram. They're like, oh, you should make like Korean style like beef ribs, or you should like do this with the brisket, or do this with the pulled pork, or do it with this ribs. And, you know, I mean, it's all fine and good, but I wanted to do, you know, Central Texas style barbecue justice. Like, even though I was doing it in my backyard for 3 years, it's like, I should probably move there and know how to do it. And the same way, I feel that same way about like Korean food. I don't really have a lot of experience cooking Korean food because my mom and my grandma cook it all the time. So I was kind of like, whatever, like I don't need to cook it, I just need to eat it. I don't really necessarily want to just throw Korean food that I know and just throw it on a smoker and just say like, oh, this is my fusion of whatever. For me, I want to be able to make sure that the Korean food as a base is good, and like I feel confident doing that before I start like bringing, you know, smoke and fire and barbecue into it. I think it's just more so I like respect for what I'm trying to replicate is the thing that's most important to me.
Since we're kind of on the topic of like, you know, marrying the, you know, the culture, your culture with barbecue, I kind of wanted to talk about like your passions, because, you know, you've said in a few interviews that, like, you know, teaching is like one of the like main things that you've always wanted to do, and it's your dream, and it's what you were doing before, you know, all this I guess craziness started.
You know, I think the one thing that I do enjoy about like this space and being able to do this is that I think I realized that after I left teaching and coaching and I went to barbecue, I'm like, man, I missed it. The one thing where I felt that I got to mesh like everything that I wanted to do was I loved like training new people who came in. Be able to share not just like, hey, this is the cook schedule, just make sure you follow it, but just be able to look at something and be like, okay, is this ahead or behind? How would you go about like going from like, you know, halfway through a cook till the end? What do you see, and what do you think you need to do until the end? Being able to teach guys who know nothing about barbecue and being able to put so much importance on something that just seems like very insignificant in the like grand scheme of things, of like even like trimming a brisket. Like, why is this trimming this one particular part so important to the end product itself? When I was at Terry Black's, they allowed me to jump between every single roll, basically. You know, I felt very confident and responsible for someone else who was new to be better, you know, and have a higher standard from then on. And so like barbecue was that thing where I'm like, oh, this teaching, this coaching thing, like it's coming together now. Coming back home and like not being able to kind of get my feet off the ground in terms of barbecue early on, I got back to teaching and coaching again, and doing YouTube videos. It's just kind of fun to find that mesh again where everything is kind of falling into place and having fun with it. So
How did you like even get connected like in there? Did you know somebody, or did you just like cold call and say, hey, you guys need help?
oh yeah, I cold called. So I actually have never even heard of Terry Black's before about 2 weeks before I actually decided to go and visit. So I was the only three places I knew about at that time was Terry Black's, La Barbecue, and Louis Miller's. And so I reached out to all of them. I was close to actually working at Louis Miller's because I had a back and forth with him. La Barbecue didn't work out. And then at that time, Franklin had that fire in the pit room. So that wasn't going to work out either. At that time, I had already told my boss that I was quitting my job, but I didn't have anything lined up. And so basically, I emailed Terry Black's, Leroy and Lewis like during the first year, and basically just said, hey, I'm quitting my job. I'm moving to Austin. If you guys have something for me, I would just love to work in a barbecue restaurant. Luckily, they gave me a chance, and I thought I was just gonna be like bussing tables or washing dishes for like 2 or 3 months, but my plan was to do a job like that, and then at the end of my shift, go stand by the pit room and just like show that I'm interested, and hopefully they would throw me in. But they gave me a chance to work an overnight shift right away, and that's just kind of what happened. Yeah, I got very lucky.
Wow, that's awesome. So this is kind of like a personal question, so you can either like not answer it, or you can like leave it out of the like or whatever. But like that is insane, man, to like say I'm quitting my job, I'm moving to Austin, and like I'll find a job when I get out there. Like, is that like in character for you normally, or
no? Absolutely not.
Not into you.
I would never do anything like that. This was one where it's like, I'm just gonna, if it doesn't work out, I'll just struggle for a year and then I'll just come back home. Like that honestly, and for the first 3 months of working, although I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, like almost every day for those first 3 months, I thought I made a mistake moving here. And it was really, really difficult to, go from somewhere where I knew everybody and I grew up in Chicago and spent there my entire life to go into a completely new place where you know nobody. And especially when you're working an overnight shift, you only know like 4 people because there's no one else in the restaurant. So you only know the people that you're working with, and that's about it. So I did form like really strong relationships with people, I think because of the nature of the job. But it ultimately was very, very difficult for sure.
Would you say that it's necessary? So like if someone's really trying to like open up a, pop-up or a restaurant, like is it super important to go down and kind of like go to Texas and like, do the thing where you like stay for a few months and even work, pro bono sometimes and like just learn as much as you can? Or do you think like the way the internet is these days, like you could get enough information to buy a big smoker, burn a bunch of meat, waste a ton of money that way, and learn that way?
I think it just depends on the person. I felt like I just wanted to do it for myself. I wanted to, actually, to be honest with you, I don't even really know what it is that I wanted to accomplish by moving here, other than like, I wanted to learn how to be a better cook. I was also at a place where I think I wanted some sort of change in my life. And I was like, well, let's just do this thing. And luckily it worked out. But I wouldn't necessarily say so. I think there's a lot of people out there right now who have bought like 250s or even with like a larger backyard pit, and they're turning out some really great food. They might come to Texas like after they've started, and then they come and like eat the food and they'll have the same kind of epiphany that I did. We're like, man, my food stinks, but it's really not bad. It's just so hard to imagine your food being at the level that some of these places are, but it's because we just haven't done it enough yet. I think it's just the thing that you can afford to do by working at these places is that you're able to do it every day, and you're practicing the same skills every day. And so like the learning just comes so much quicker. But do I think that people can do it at home or on their own? Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of really great material out there now.
in your opinion, what is the most overlooked, I guess I should say, backyard barbecue, like that people either post on Instagram, they post on YouTube, you look at it and most people do it wrong?
I mean, I would probably say brisket. I think if you cook enough barbecue, you can look at a brisket and know that like it wasn't cooked hot enough, or it wasn't cooked long enough. It was wrapped too soon, or it's wrapped too long. If the trim is off, you know the trim is off. And that all comes from like you having to cook a lot and knowing your cook and being a little bit worried about like what is a brisket gonna look like on the board. And then when you finally cut it, you're like, okay. Yeah, the thing that I did yesterday that I was a little bit worried about, that's how it changes, like how a brisket looks, or the texture, the feel of it. I had to tell myself that, and this was like another video that I talked about, like not being a perfectionist anymore. As long as you're not satisfied and you're going to make changes in the future, it's pretty good that it came out as good as it did with mistakes that you acknowledge and you already know that you're going to fix the next time. Like, I'm not saying you have to go out and eat a slice of brisket every day that you go up, but to not be able to look at the end product and think about what we could do better today, and not being able to acknowledge that or think about that is a problem, because like for me, I'm never the owner of these places. But again, if I'm giving an opportunity to be here and being at Terry Black's where they did that much volume and they're top 50 and so many people go there, I feel very responsible for making the food come out as good as it should every single time.
For you, it's like you're changing from a perfectionist standpoint to like almost like marginal, like where it's like, if I did a 95 this time, like a perfectionist would say, well, the next time better be at least a 96.
You're right,
like,
right.
You're talking about more like, well, I'm at a 95, but in reality, I hit a 95, but that's really the top end, and I'm really at an 85. So as long as I'm between 86 and 96, then I'm improving.
There's never going to be like a perfect cook. Certain ribs that you hit a bone and it doesn't look as good when it gets on the tray, or the sausage was cooked a little bit too hot, so like it has that color, like it tastes exactly the same, but the color is too dark or it's splotchy. It's things like that where it just bothers me, because sometimes I know it's because I know that I made all those mistakes that I see. I remember I put sausage too close on the pit and they had these bald spots on them, or I know that like I cooked it too hot, so the pooling on top of the brisket was too much and there was gonna be a bald spot, and that was like 6 hours into the cook, and I'm thinking about it all the way until tomorrow morning, But like if you think about that, like you can't move on, it's just like it is what it is, and like tomorrow you just got to fix it. It's just trying to raise the bar and the standard, and being able to like appreciate like every single person's role in this long process. I think is really important to fully being able to understand like what you're doing.
There's so many things in barbecue, and it kind of like goes back to what you were talking about, how like just some years ago there was just not a lot of information out there. And for me getting into the hobby, like there were just certain things that people would just say like, you just don't do that, and I just kind of accepted it. Like one thing is like, oh, you have to use coarse grained salt, and it's like, if you ask me why, I would be like, I don't know, it's just because they said you should. But the question that I have is about bad smoke. Like this is probably the one that I hear like all the time. Like if you go on a YouTube video and like watch like somebody who doesn't have that many videos, doesn't have a lot of experience, like the number one comment people will look for is like, let me see that smokestack. If it's like dirty, I'm gonna like rip them a new one in the comment section. So is bad smoke really that bad? Like, is it like when bad smoke gets into meat, does it become like, if you cooked something with bad smoke, is it like unedible, or is there like a place for that flavor profile of bad smoke?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I get that question a lot, and I don't really have like all the time to answer it fully in the comment section. I don't want to say it's not important. Obviously, it's very important, because that's one of your indications of a fire that's burning efficiently. And I think when I'm thinking about dirty smoke or dirty fire and things like that, it's when you clearly know like you have X amount of logs in your firebox and it should be a certain temperature and it's not. You can kind of see some level of like flame, but it's not really active. Like like the flame kind of flickers and it turns into smoke. It flickers and it turns into smoke. And then if you have to go in and blow on the fire every like 5 minutes to keep it going, then you're probably getting probably a little bit that dirty smoke like we're talking about. And in terms of like, is it bad? It can leave like a film on your tongue a little bit, where it can get that like when you drink like really dry like red wine, it's not necessarily that same thing, but it leaves like a film over your mouth sometimes after you eat barbecue, and it just lingers. Like, you don't want that. You don't want anyone to leave your place or eat your food and have it be like a smoke bomb went off in their mouth. If you go to like a bar and they like smoke their glasses with a smoke gun and things like that, all that wood and like the sawdust or the wood chips that you can buy or the wood chunks that you can buy in bags, all that stuff is super dry. If you burn it, it's most likely going to be a really clean burning fire, just because I don't know, this is another like bro science of barbecue moment, where I think the level of moisture that's left in the wood is that thing that creates that acrid like smoke flavor that lingers too much. Because if it wasn't for that extra moisture, then all that extra, like all those, the wood chips, the wood chunks, the sawdust, the smoke on, all that stuff would always leave that sort of film to it. But it doesn't. It kind of leaves like a pleasant, like smoky, but as soon as you smell it or taste it, it's kind of gone, which is why I think barbecue, when you cook with like really dense wood that has a certain level of moisture, that smoke flavor is actually there when you eat it. It's not just the color, it's not just the smell, like you can taste it. Yeah. But again, I could be completely wrong. That's just what I thought about all the time.
Theoretically, I was thinking like, well, it's like a bad smoke is like a smothered fire. So like, if I'm cooking something using the minion method and I have like a bunch of like unlit coals on top of these like smoldering wood chunks, like, isn't that bad smoke? But maybe it is the moisture then, huh?
I think it's still okay. But I think sometimes we put too much coal in there, and that's why the minion method or something that kind of like the heat is moving away from it and it's starting to spread out is important. If we just kind of like put in the middle and just smother it, then you get that real, like, you'll come back outside like 20 minutes later, like, man, the temperature's still sitting at like 150. Then obviously there's just not enough oxygen that's going into, that fire. I think that lack of oxygen is usually the main reason why we're getting that smoke. But again, like a lot of times, like really I've learned to cook from watching the firebox and like being able to read a fire rather than reading a smokestack. At Terry Black's, when I got there, we put on the smokestacks, on the end of the smokestacks, we put a scrubber system. So it's not smoke that's coming out, it's steam. I always had the thought that like, oh yeah, you read a fire by seeing how clean that smoke is, but there's no way to tell it now because it's steam, And when I was working at Truth, like our fireboxes were inside and our smokestacks were outside. So if I wanted to check the fire to look at the smokestack, I'm going to go outside every single time. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's why I emphasize a lot, like how to position wood inside a firebox, because that's going to allow you to have a better chance of not having logs that are smoldering a lot. Because that's the thing where it's like, man, like I put 6 logs in the fire. It should be probably around 300, but it's only at 225. Like that's obviously something's not necessarily right. It's like the air, it's not getting enough air. Maybe the stack is too close. Like you just have to allow it to move enough to kind of clear out.
In the line of thinking, like, or in the line of like, so many things that are out there that like we just accept as truths for like barbecue beginners like myself. One of them is like dark bark. Like they say, oh, you want that like really nice dark bark. The last brisket I did, I learned like a lot of different things, and I made the bark like super dark, and it was delicious. But I wondered, like, I know there's like 3 or 4 different things I could do to make this even darker. Like, I wanted to ask you, like, is there like a point where it's like that can be a mistake where like brisket is too dark?
I don't know. I haven't really ever tried to do anything in particular to make my bark darker than it needs to be. I just feel like as long as you take care of everything that you need to, it kind of takes care of it. It just kind of does its thing. Adding moisture throughout your cook will, especially in the beginning, will attract more smoke. But am I willing to sacrifice potentially having a soggier bark to have a darker bark on the outside? I don't think so. So it just really depends on, like, you have to think about like your Is that thing going to attribute to potentially having the darker bark? Probably. But how does that changing that part of the cook affect like something else during the cook? Like my first barbecue talk was about using like the foil tips, right, on the edges of the brisket. And yes, it fixes an issue of if you have thin briskets or the fire got too hot, then you can cap it to save the corners a little bit. But ultimately, the thing that now you have to worry about is that very top part where that foil is hanging over that lean end right there. It's collecting a lot of moisture right there in that steam, and it'll sog it up. And if you're not careful, you'll have bald spots on your brisket because it collects too much steam in there. So it's always like finding a balance between like, yeah, this fixes one issue, but am I sacrificing something else that is ultimately more important?
Yeah, you just kind of like triggered another question in my mind is like, I noticed that whenever I get bald spots on my brisket, there's like a point of like no return. Like no matter how like much seasoning or whatever it is, it's like the fat won't make bark anymore. Like what is that? Is that like, is there like a scientific explanation or like a bro science explanation?
Well, my bro science explanation is I think most of it attributes to like your brisket is squeezing all this moisture out in the beginning of the cook. And so while it's doing that, if you cook it too hot, it squeezes really, really fast. Like sometimes you'll see like if your fire gets too hot, your brisket that used to be here, and after a couple hours, it should shrink to here. But now it's like here. It's like, oh shoot, like I think it's almost done, but it's not. It's just really, really tight. And then you'll probably see the brisket's curled up a lot, and there's like a kiddie pool of just liquid, and then you dump it, and now it's just a bald patch. And I think that attributes to because it's squeezed so fast, a lot of that moisture is just gushing out of there. And when you try to tip it and you let it drain, it just fills up right away. To me, that's like in my mind, I'm like, all right, I know that for tomorrow, that is a temperature that's too hot.
Is using a water pan actually beneficial to the bark as well?
I'll be honest with you. The water pan thing is still something that I'm still kind of confused about. I've never really found a difference between there being a lot of moisture or extra moisture in a pit than not. I haven't found anything that seemed significant. I've done it before where we have full water pans, and other times we forget to fill them up and we're like, oh shoot, it's dry. And it's like, I didn't find a difference. And I think the main reason why I never really stressed about it is, one, if we are really worried about that, then we got a spritz bottle. And also there's like, if you have 1,000-gallon pit and you put 25 or 24 briskets in there is a lot of moisture that's coming out, right? There's a lot of meat that's in there. I would say if you're in a smaller cooker, maybe that might be a time to add a water pan, just because it's a smaller space and there's not that much moisture coming from the meat itself. And the fire is probably still pretty significant for just cooking one piece of meat. Do I think it's important and does it make a difference? I'm sure it does. I just don't think it makes a significant difference where I'm so worried about refilling a hotel pan of water inside my pit.
Yeah. I just recently, like literally like an hour before we started talking, I took out the baffle plate out of my old country pecos.
I know, I saw that. Yeah.
I guess my concern is like flames are going to like kind of come into the cooker. And I was hoping like if I use a water pan, will it kind of like absorb that like direct heat? So like kind of acting as a baffle without like ruining the airflow.
I think so. Yeah, I think that is a good tool to use for that. But I would say if you do have flames that are coming in, I would just say just move the coal bed and like your wood just closer to the firebox door. And also just trying to maneuver the way that your wood stacks so that it doesn't shoot straight into the firebox. Which is why I kind of make a collapsed fire a little bit, so it doesn't have like a straight avenue to like go straight into the firebox itself.
This sounds really familiar.
I like to repeat myself.
No, it's from that video that I was referring to. Yeah. Now I understand why you said that. So thank you.
For me, barbecue has just kind of been one of the things that I've used to kind of express myself a little bit more and to get myself out of my comfort zone. And still to this day, making YouTube videos is still not one of the things that I'm most comfortable with. But as I continue to do so, as I continue to share and get other people in this circle and to be more knowledgeable about barbecue. It just helps me to combine all my passions together, like I said before, with coaching, with teaching, with barbecue. It's all these things that I really do enjoy, and the more and more I get to do it, the more confident I get, but also the more fun I can have because I'm not so stressed out about it. If you have any questions for me that you think would make for a really good barbecue talk, feel free to message me on Instagram at KnoxAvBarbecue, or you can also leave a comment down below. Make sure you check out Anthony's YouTube channel as well. I'll leave a link to his YouTube channel in the description down below, where he also does some really fun, interesting videos. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation that we both had. And if you like this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, share this video with your friends, and I'll see you guys in the next one.